Hello. So, this is a video that I've tried to make like 5 times at least, and I just can't. This isn't something with like a correct answer. Um, it's hard for me to like piece together an argument. I keep like flying off in a dozen different directions, and it does boil down to like emotions and like just how you approach life. Um, Basically, I kind of want to defend transition because I'm a contrarian and I enjoy arguing. I enjoy, being the devil's advocate and whatever. I also still have a little bit of a cold, so fair warning to those distressed by sniffles and other cold like sounds. Um, Basically, I have always really hated being controlled. Like, any sense that somebody else is telling me what to do, it just enrages me. And that might not be the most mature thing, to still be saying that, I'm approaching 30 and I'm still like, don't tell me what to do. But, like, don't tell me what to do. I don't know. I don't like it. I have always been just angry and irascible, and I feel very strongly in my heart for people who want to do things that other people say they shouldn't do. And I am passionately in favor of their right to do so. Um, yeah, basically, I want to defend my evil centrist opinions, some of them, and why I feel the way I do. So, one of my entry points into thinking about this, because I've thought about this many times recently, mostly I come up with a bunch of great arguments, like in the shower, and then I get out, and then I forget all of them. Um, as I just did, you can see my hair is still a little bit wet. So, I love Jeffree Star. He is a horrific person. I don't want to be friends with him. I don't want to meet him. I don't want to know him. But I like that he exists. I like that he is out there doing what he does. I like that he got very rich being very stupid. I find it hopeful. It's almost like light on the horizon, right? Like, if he can get rich just being an idiot on the internet, so can you. It's possible. It's sort of like winning the lottery. I think people like him, in my view, in my heart, they fill that role of like having the lottery. Like, you're not going to win the lottery, but like it allows hope, right? It's like, this could happen to you. It's not going to happen to you, but it could happen to you, right? And it's important to me that he is a bad person, right? That's part of why I like him. I like that. I like that he's so unlikable, and yet nobody can stop him from being himself. Nobody can stop him from being an asshole on the internet all day and making money from that. I mean, he's done other stuff. He had like a makeup business. He did music, whatever. But like, his main thing, ever since he was on MySpace, ever since he was like an emo hero in the early 2000s, has been just being utterly obnoxious and getting attention for being utterly obnoxious. And I'm not saying that's my goal. Um, I suppose it could be classified as that to some extent. You could say that I'm just on the internet being obnoxious, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, I really like that nobody can tell him what to do, and nobody can stop him, and people can't take that away from him just because he's an asshole, right? I like Amish people for the same reason. I don't agree with their beliefs at all. I wouldn't want to be Amish under any circumstances, but I do like that you can just live your whole life kind of just like LARPing like it's 1600, and like, you can just do that and nobody can stop you. And that's very important. I can't handle the idea of like people being told that they can't do something because it's bad for themselves. That kind of disgusts me. I think the basis of a fair society and a fair legal system is the idea that you should be able to do whatever you want as long as you aren't causing material harm to another person, right? my rights end where yours begin. It's the basic premise. And if what you're doing is not actually hurting somebody else, you should be able to do it. And if other people classify that as hurting yourself, that's none of their business. Um, I just, I can't deal. I know I keep saying this, but I just can't deal with anyone, saying that people shouldn't do something because it's bad for them. Especially when, like, who are you? Who are you to say that? I'm already veering way off track. I obviously do think transition is a terrible idea, but I draw, like, a really hard line at saying that people shouldn't do it because it's a bad idea. I think being able to do things that are bad for you is, it's more than just, like, not your business and not your place and you don't know everything. It's like, I think people do get something out of doing things that are bad for them that's, like, helpful to them. There is something very affirming, if I can use the word, the tainted word, about feeling, this is going to sound super emo, feeling the realness of your own life, in being able to do things that you know you aren't supposed to do or that you know are harmful. And I think it's important, like, for people's souls, in a sense, to be able to do those things. I think it gives you something that you can never get when you are restrained and held back by other people and held back by the society you live in. And I don't know, maybe I'll be able to explain that better later on as I continue talking about it. I don't know, maybe some of you already understand what I'm saying, maybe you don't, but that's part of my take. I'm a little bit distracted because I've been beagled very aggressively, as you saw. When it comes to things like drug prohibition or prostitution, anything where a behavior that does not cause direct harm to other people is criminalized or banned in any way, I do object to that. Now, I know people are going to go slippery slope on this. Obviously, I do not support human trafficking. So, don't even start with that. Human trafficking is causing direct harm to other people, and you should be arrested for that. I think job opportunities and other ways for women to make money are important, right? When people get involved in prostitution, it is usually under some pretty bad circumstances. But that doesn't mean that it should be criminalized. And I don't think many feminists think that prostitution should be criminalized. I think they think pimping should be criminalized, which is different. So I'm not, like, accusing the theoretical audience of, like, wanting to throw women in jail who are being prostitutes to survive. Because I don't think most people watching that think that. When it comes to, like, drugs and stuff, it's very, if somebody goes on to commit a crime on drugs that causes harm to other people, jail. Just doing the drugs, not jail, right? Your body, I don't think that belongs to anyone else. I think we have one thing in life, and that's our own autonomy, right? And I think that's where my belief comes from about this is, you don't necessarily get anything. You aren't owed anything. You don't deserve anything. The world isn't necessarily going to give you even the basics, food, clean water, whatever. But the one thing you have is, like, your own actions and who you are and what you do. So I think that's why it is important, why people do get value out of doing things that they are told are bad for them or that are bad for them, or that they know objectively are bad for them and they do it anyway. And I think that's important that you are able to do that in life. And so I sympathize greatly, and I don't think it is at all appropriate to take away options for people just because you have a problem with it. When it's like, when somebody transitions, that's really not your problem. It's just not. Like, I can sit here and criticize it, as I do frequently, but like, the idea that I'm being harmed by it, obviously not. And I don't think it's fair to classify ideas as harmful. I think having an open discussion of ideas is the way to a good society. It is the best way to determine policy. It is the best way to forge a path in life, in politics, whatever. The problem, as I see it, has been the suppression of criticism of transition and the suppression of feminism rather than the propagation of transition and the propagation of queer theory. If you can argue against those openly, fundamentally, if you have a good idea, if you are right, you should be able to say why you're right. And if you can say why you're right, like, that's on you to say why and get other people to agree with you. I guess I have managed to, like, maintain the delusion well into an adulthood of, like, basically classical liberalism and the idea that, like, most people can be reasoned with. And, like, it's possible to do that. So, treating it like, it's an idea is an illness that needs to be suppressed, that's, like, immensely authoritarian, right? I can't get on board with that, and it kind of disgusts me a little bit. It's also reminiscent of, like, I guess part of my objection is, like, the classification as, like, oh, well, and vulnerable people, well, any adult who transitions is inherently vulnerable, right? It's this almost circular argument that's used of, like, well, if you're unwell enough to transition, then you're inherently vulnerable and therefore shouldn't. And, like, there may even be truth to that, but because of the history there, maybe I'm biased because of the history of, like, the Soviet Union and Soviet satellite states. It was basically policy, when they couldn't otherwise suppress dissidents, to classify them as mentally ill and put them in psychiatric institutions. So that fact often looms very large in my mind when it comes to classifying people as vulnerable just because you think they think wrong. I don't know how much I've really expounded on my opinions of psychiatry. I know I've touched on it many times. I wouldn't go so far as to classify psychiatry on the whole as a tool of oppression, but I would go so far as to say it is unfounded and unscientific, and it is the only field of medicine that has not caught up with modern scientific practice and is not based on finding causes, and is instead just classifications of symptoms and just theory, just pure theory, right? I mean, they still teach Freud in school for psychology, which is, I mean, fucking Freud. If you've read any Freud, you know that he is just going off. He's just basically doing what I do, except he gets called, like, the father of psychology or whatever, He's just off writing down his essays and going on, and I've read some of his stuff. I couldn't even get through one book, but I read his, he wrote a book on dreams. I don't know what it's called. I read, like, half of it, and I couldn't keep going because it was just essay after essay after essay of him just, like, expounding on his opinions. That's kind of what a lot of psychology is. It's a lot of opinions. It's a lot of, I don't like the way you think, therefore I'm going to classify you as being in a disease state when, like, there may not be any evidence for that. I mean, they're at least starting to do, like, MRI imaging and stuff, but I find it all, psychology is like the garbage bin for everything neurology hasn't figured out yet. As soon as a physical cause is found for a formerly psychiatric disorder, then it's neurology, right? Seizures were once considered, like, psychological Dementia was once considered psychological. It was classified in the same category, and then they were like, oh, well, actually, there's a real observable physical disease process happening here. There's an actual, trackable abnormality going on. So now this isn't psychology anymore, which is just, it's about as damning as you can get. The field itself damns itself by showing you, as soon as there's a physical reason for something, it's no longer psychology. I am, in some sense, pro mental illness. And, the first time I had that thought, it was like, haha, I'm funny, right? That's a funny thing to say. It's a funny way to try and, like, weasel into a point I'm making. But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, you know what? That's actually a statement that I can stand behind. I don't like classifying people as mentally ill because either you don't like them or they don't like themselves. I strongly dislike the coercive nature of what is classified as mental health care. I hate therapy. As a general rule, I think it is a paid friendship, and this is widely validated by people's general statements, which you will see all over the place. If you go, like, if people are asking for advice on, like, finding a good therapist or whatever, over and over, you will see people say, oh, it doesn't matter what kind of therapy. What matters is that you get along with them. If you think about that for even 2 seconds, like, that's very clear. Like, oh, literally, there's nothing special this person has, right? It doesn't matter what they do. People will literally tell you it doesn't matter what they do. It matters that you get along with them. So you're paying someone to be your friend, basically, which is just, it says so much, right? I mean, about the society at large, which is not where I'm intending to go with this today, but there is a time that comes in people's lives when you are older and when you are tired and when, you genuinely are in a situation where you're like, oh my God, like, I need something to change. There is also lots of young people and a normal phase of life that happens when you're a teenager or a young adult where you enjoy dark things. You enjoy being morose. You enjoy romanticizing things, right? And that has been thrown into the bucket, right? The big bucket of people who all need help now, apparently. And I think people being dramatic and people being morose and having feelings and thinking about death, I think these are all normal things. I think they are all, frankly, healthy things. I think that classifying them as an illness, despite claims to the contrary, is in fact making these things more taboo, and it makes them unacceptable to express. And it crushes creativity, it crushes art, it crushes just individuality and people's ability to fantasize, to cope, to be themselves, and to live their own lives in the way that they see fit to do so. Therapy and psychiatry are, in my opinion, often just brainwashing. And for a field that invented the term gaslighting, they do a lot of it. The whole point is to get you to want to change yourself. It's to make you decide that you need to change, and that if you just change yourself enough, you'll be happy and you'll be functioning. And, frequently it doesn't work, first of all. Secondly, it individualizes a societal problem, right? I mean, if you're at a point where more than half of your society can be classified as having a mental illness, I think it's pretty clear that the problem is the society and not the individual. And yet, the entire premise of therapy and of psychiatry is that you are the problem. You need to change yourself. You just need to get on board with the way you're expected to live your life now. To live an isolated life, and, if you're not happy, blame your brain chemistry, right? We'll just drug you out of that. And it doesn't work, right? Because, of course, if it actually worked, then it would be addictive, so they can't prescribe those drugs that actually will make you happy. So they prescribe you the ones that kind of numb you out, and then you're numb and you're bored all the time, and then you just feel worse, right? You get trapped in psychiatry, you get trapped in therapy because you're never good enough, right? You're never healthy enough. I mean, I suppose, if you just walk in an office and you're just trying to, you just want to talk about something and you're in and out in 6 months, I guess that does happen. I don't know. I've never seen it happen. I have never known a single person to start therapy and then be discharged because they were deemed better. Um, I guess it probably happens sometimes to some people, but I have literally never known a single person who that has happened to. It is always the case that there's always more. There's always more that needs to be done, or they need to stay on a medication, or blah, 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 right? And I am very experienced in this field. I have been on dozens of medications. None of them worked over the long term. Like, 2 worked for a while and then stopped working, and the rest either did nothing or made me actively worse. And consistently, they always put you on medications, but they never take you off. I pretty much took myself off every medication that I went off of. Nobody ever helped me get off a medication. It was always, oh, well, you should stay on. Oh, I think that's helping you. Oh, blah, 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 even when I was doing nothing, right? And it's physically damaging, first of all, I was on a medication where I gained 60 pounds in 3 months. I have been on medications where it damaged my thyroid. I had bad liver numbers, blah, 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 right? I never stayed on the really hard medications for that long. People who do suffer some pretty awful side effects and see, if you're on antipsychotics for life, that significantly reduces your lifespan by a decade or more. So, and it's treated as harmless, right? You're put on these medications, and basically, I have been directly told to keep taking something because, oh, well, I think it's helping. It might be helping, even if they can't, express anything that, they've noticed that's a positive change from it. They'll still tell you to stay on it as though it's harmless, right? There's this assumption of harmlessness that staying on is harmless, but coming off could be harmful, when, in fact, staying on is also harmful. And I've been on lots of medications that damaged my well-being severely, that made me feel worse, and that I was told to keep taking because, they want to believe that it's working. And there's still almost this fundamental problem, I guess, that's, inescapable in any field like this, of they are also humans with psychology. And so they also have this desire to see a positive result in something that they're doing that they think, is helpful. And so they want to believe the medication they're prescribing you is helping and whatever and blah, blah, blah. And even if it's not, they don't care. They want you to keep taking it. And if you don't want to keep taking it, you're mentally ill, you're the problem. I have a lot of problems with psychology as a field. And it has led me to this point where, I am the happiest I've ever been. And I am fairly convinced that there was never anything wrong with me, that people just, kind of just didn't like me. And, I just don't operate well in the structures around me, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean there is a disease process happening in my body or my brain, right? That's if you look at it that way, it's a very strange way of seeing things. Say, well, okay, well, this person doesn't function like everybody else in this specific context, They don't like school, or they're not good at this or that, and therefore there's something wrong with them. It's not just that they don't fit into this. It's that they have a problem that has to be medically treated. And given how unhappy I was for so long, I mean, it just kind of, I do have a bone to pick, right? I'm very, when you put a kid in therapy and they just get worse, and then you put them on medication and they just get worse, and they get worse and worse and worse over time until it's okay, time to apply for disability because you're a totally non-functional adult, whereas when you initially went into this treatment, you were functioning and attending school and blah, 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 and yeah, you were a little weird, and yeah, you were, not the happiest, but you were just living your life and you didn't want help, and then they made you get help, and now everything is worse and it's all falling apart and it's not getting better, and everything you do makes it worse. Maybe the answer is to stop. Yet that never seems to be the answer. The answer is always more, right? If somebody gets worse in treatment, they need more treatment. It's a self-fulfilling field. right? And it's a business model, right? Therapy is very much a business model, and you see this now. It's starting to be expressed, more openly outside the field. Oh, everyone should be in therapy, right? Because it's just they've eaten up as many people as they can, right? All of the unhappy people, all of the weird people, everybody who's considered to be in any way different from other people has now already been thrown into therapy. So now we're like out of our market. We've saturated the market. Now we need more people. Now everybody needs to be in therapy, right? It's very sinister, in my opinion, especially since it perpetuates the idea of like the structure of therapy and like the social rules that have sprung up around therapy and have gone into mainstream society around, boundaries and relationships and stuff, where basically now if you try to like open up to somebody, well, I'm not your therapist, right? I'm sorry if you can hear my dog groaning. He's unhappy that I'm not feeding him. As I was saying, basically all these rules have sprung up and all these, new terms and new ideas. And it's basically therapy perpetuating itself, right? Because now if you try to talk to somebody and they don't want to talk to you, instead of just like, oh, I like, you clearly feel closer to me than I do to you. Now it's like trauma dumping or, I'm not your therapist. This kind of idea that you see people espousing about each other and about relationships, where now it's like feeding into this, right? Where now things that used to be in the realm of normal relationships and normal human social support, well, now that's medical. Now you need a specialist for that, and like, it perpetuates the degradation of human relationships that has spread throughout society. I would say Western society, but it's not just Western society. It's pretty much all developing and developed economies are at this point where human relationships are fundamentally breaking down, and it's perpetuated by this idea that like, okay, well, things that used to be okay to share with people and like social support and argument and emotion, all those things, no, like that all goes to the therapist's office now. And now you're just supposed to be like a fucking robot with people, and everything's supposed to be chill all the time and whatever. And again, I veer way off course, but this is all part of the argument I'm making, which is that people need to be allowed to be weird, right? I don't think it's fair. I don't think that anyone has any right to coerce other people into being healthy as they see it. Because I, first of all, find that idea as it currently exists very flawed. But secondly, it just encroaches so deeply into like your right to be a real person and to live your own life and to not constantly need other people to like check you off and say that what you're doing is okay and that what you're doing is good. I do have a bit of that like strong individualist streak in me, where there's definitely a timeline. There's definitely a timeline where I'm like sitting in a cabin in Montana on my front porch with a shotgun because I heard a truck like a mile away. I have that in me. I have that person in me. And I have gone on this like long loop where like that's how I was as a kid, and then I wasn't, and I was suppressed. I suppressed myself. I participated. I can't free myself from the fact that like once I was an adult, I didn't have to continue participating in the supposed care I was receiving, but I did. And now I've kind of come back around to like, oh, well, actually, it was always fine, and it's fine to be that person, and I never had to be anybody else. And I think it's very important that everybody have that right and that ability to come back around to being the way they want to be, regardless of what anyone else thinks of it. Which is to say, when you get into like the details of transition and like, insurance companies paying for it and all this stuff, that's like, okay, I don't think that's medical care any more than a lot of therapy is medical care. But I do think, if somebody is just on their own quixotic quest to change their sex as close, or as close as they can approximate to that. I'm all for that. I'm very like, go out there, be weird, be just this bizarre person, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise, because it's just, to me, it's more important to engage in that self-actualization, basically, than it is to be safe. I think it's more important to go out there and do things and get into trouble and to like mess up in life, or not mess up, however you see it, and just have that personal freedom and personal ability to do those things. I think that's more important than avoiding the damage, because you can't avoid the damage in life sometimes, and in some sense the damage is worth it. And I do feel rather strongly that if I hadn't been able to do what I did, then I probably would still want to do it. And I wouldn't have the thought processes I have now if I hadn't had the experiences that I had. And I also, I obviously had that experience and can sympathize with the distress of being in a position where you feel trapped and where you feel like you can't do the things you want to do, and that you are being controlled, and that, maybe that like adulthood is a lie or something, and you thought you could go out and be free in the world, and then you're not. And I do prioritize that ability to experience things over protection from them. And that's kind of where it boils down to, like, fundamental philosophical differences, where there's no argument past that point, because that's just a value thing, where I value personal autonomy more than I value safety, and I value freedom and personal ability to just go out and exist how you want to exist, far more than I do, concerns of society, of like what people should be doing, or how you should be living, or what is best for you. And I'm also a person who really abhors arrogance, and you might not see it as arrogance, like you see it as looking out for vulnerable people, and I see it as like arrogance and authoritarianism. And like, who are you to call me vulnerable or call somebody else vulnerable? It's almost offensive. It's belittling in some sense. And it is almost this majoritarian oppression. I sound like absolutely insane right now. It's majoritarian oppression to call somebody mentally ill because you don't like what they're doing to themselves, and you disagree with how they live their lives, even when it does not affect you, right? And, there are places where things like this do affect you, like public bathrooms, changing rooms, right? Sex segregated spaces are the most fought over, most obvious area where it does affect you. But to then say, because you don't want to have mixed sex spaces, right, which I can totally get, I agree with. I think, I agree with the idea of third spaces as the solution to this. But to then say, because this injury has happened to you, where you've lost a single sex space, that you can then take your anger from that and push that forward into saying, well, people shouldn't be able to do this at all, and you shouldn't be able to like get plastic surgery to change your apparent sex, change your appearance, change your sex characteristics, whatever. You shouldn't be able to get hormones or whatever, because I don't like any of this, and I don't like how this is being used, to encroach on women's rights. That's not the same thing, right? It's not the same to encroach on women's rights just by doing those other things, right? Those are different steps. And I don't think it's at all acceptable to extend your dislike of one thing onto a broader thing like that when the broader happening doesn't affect you, right? You should focus on the thing that affects you, but like the line doesn't go any farther than that, in my opinion. Furthermore, I think a reason transition has become so much more popular is because of the sense of restriction of the ability to fuck up in life. I think the fact that we live in a world now where it is so hard to reinvent yourself, where it is basically impossible to leave an old identity behind, I think that's what makes it so appealing. It is a sanctioned route to leaving your old identity behind. Everything follows you now. It's very difficult to just up and move somewhere, get a new job somewhere. You need records for everything, you need references for everything. And I think that's not good for people. And like it does almost necessitate more and more extreme ways of acting out in order to scratch that itch of feeling that you own yourself and you own your own life. And, I'm watching over these clips again, and, like, I do sound absolutely unhinged. But, like, I feel very passionately that, like, I'm allowed to be unhinged, and I'm allowed to express my crazy opinions, and people self-censoring their own strange opinions and their own weirdness and the things they believe that are like kind of out of left field that don't go with like an accepted ideology. I think to self-censor myself like that would be to participate in the problem. And I really enjoy when I see people out there who are just being weird and being abnormal and like not feeling like they have to justify everything about themselves that is weird or abnormal. And I would like to be that person to some extent. I really I understand the function of mental illness as identity, and this compulsion that seems to exist now of labeling yourself and every aspect of your personality, you know, in order essentially to justify something that you do or the way that you are that isn't like other people or is not the correct way to do things, the psychology approved, therapy approved, proper way to behave. If you don't fit it, the right thing to do then is to go and get yourself some labels so that you are basically allowed to be who you are. You know, I see how it happens, and so I'm more mad at the system than the participants, and I guess, this is related to why I am pro people being able to transition and so forth. Is like, they didn't necessarily create this system where you need to find an approved path to be unhappy or an approved path to be weird. And like operating in a society that we all do, that is the way to get by a lot of the time. And, it opens resources for you, both, actual like resources where, maybe you're like on disability if you can't hold down a job or something, but also just like social capital, social resources, that you won't get if you're just weird and you don't have like an approved justification for being different from other people. And so, you go out and you get your labels and you call yourself neurodivergent and I have this and that and that and that. And, that's why I am the way I am. So, like, you can't be mad at me for being the way I am. And, like, it's a very sad situation. But it can be changed, right? It wasn't always like this, and it doesn't always have to be like this. And, like, I see how it happened with transition, where it became classified into this system. And this sort of nebulous world that used to exist, where there's sort of like this mix of, like, well, all gay people and gender non-conforming people, and, like, people kind of went in and out of it, and maybe, they just did drag on the weekends or whatever, and, like, it was just their fantasy of theirs, and, like, other people tried to actually live it, and the sort of, like, people floated in and out, and it was just kind of, it was a different part of personality rather than, a defined permanent identity trait. I don't like permanent defined identity traits. Um, I just, I am open to, a different understanding of it, which is to say, there are reasons why you are the way you are. I don't like the whole I am this way because I am this way, and it's not social, and it's not, like, physically traceable, and, it's just, like, my spirit, whatever. Um, I think, it's the contrarian in me also that participates in this aspect where, like, in a world where it's not, you aren't a defined class in the society, and it's not something deemed an illness that is treated, and, people are just, not getting too deep into the ideology, and they're just kind of playing around being gender nonconforming or living a fantasy they have or whatever. I think if I approached it from that angle, I am more open to it and more accepting. So there's a certain part of me that objects to transition because of its status and because of its use and its usefulness in the society as the accepted expression of unhappiness in today's youth. It fulfills that role that different similar statuses have fulfilled in decades past, like eating disorders, subcultures, all sorts of things, but it's the same kids, it's the same artsy, angsty kids that all end up in these situations, and the situation changes over time based on what's popular, essentially. But you see it's the same type of kid, it's the same type of person. And I think the reason that it thing is always changing is because these things are medicalized, is because it becomes defined and it becomes categorized and it turns into a new box. And then you have to find something new. And in another world, in another context, another life, where this was not the case, I think I could see it very differently. And I think I could be much less objecting to it. And, this brings up a lot of conflict for me, is this awareness that I have of, like, part of my problem here is not just with transition itself, although the narrative around transition is one that I object to and criticize and whatever. But people think all kinds of things that I object to and criticize and they think are logically flawed. And it doesn't piss me off as much. I think, and it could be different, I guess. And because I'm aware of that in myself, and I'm also, obviously I've been that person. It really combines to create a situation where I have a lot of sympathy, and I still very viscerally react to suggestions of restricting people's choices in life. And because of my other life experiences, I very viscerally react to any conversation around restricting people's choices based on some rando's assessment of whether or not they should be allowed to make choices, which is not based on like any actual, status that purely assesses, your ability to make choices. Rather, if you make the wrong choices, you're deemed not able to make choices, right? Um, it's really dystopian in a sense, and as a way of restricting transition, I can't get on board with that. And I also just I want there to be a world where people can be weird, and I want there to be that ability. And it's almost like it does fit into the to go full circle. Jeffree Star, don't like him, but I love that he exists. Amish people don't like him, love that they exist. Add trans people, don't like them, love that they exist. Don't want to live in a world where they can't exist, right? Even though they're wrong, just like Jeffree Star is wrong, and Amish people are wrong, according to me. Living in a world that you can't do those things feels very colorless and sad and dreary and restrictive, and not like, who wants to live in a world where like everybody is the same and everybody agrees with the same things and everybody just lives their boring lives and nothing unusual ever happens and nobody ever gets rich who doesn't deserve to get rich, and nobody is out there just being extremely strange, and everybody participates in normal hobbies and goes to fucking therapy so that you can go home and have like the same relationships, and everybody's romantic relationships are the same and all their friendships are the same, because there's only this one right way to navigate human relationships, and if you do anything wrong, then it gets a label and you get told you're doing it wrong. Yeah. I have been avoiding this because I know, when I sound kind of crazy, but like, I have reached this point in my life where I kind of want to embrace that. I kind of want to like defend people being crazy and defend, people who are just out there doing things that are totally objectionable, as long as they aren't actually hurting somebody who isn't that person. I don't want to be somebody who goes along with things that I disagree with, or let by my silence, imply agreement with things that I don't agree with in terms of this stuff, particularly. Where, like, because on a logical basis, I'm very turfy. On, like, a rational basis, I very much am, like, on team, this is a bad idea, and, like, doctors shouldn't lie to people the way I was lied to, and the way many of us were lied to about, the risks of transition, the risks of using hormones, the risks of these surgeries, the damage that it causes, the fact that it doesn't fix any of the underlying problems that you have with yourself. All of that is true. All of that is very true, but, like, I don't want to imply by my silence that my conclusion to that is then that, like, oh, well, we should start getting into people's personal lives and saying no to them over things that are not our business. And, like, when the information is available, when people aren't lied to, if somebody's still, like, on that path, they're like, I want to do it anyway, like, I don't, nobody's telling them it's going to fix anything. Whether or not they believe still it's going to fix anything or not is almost irrelevant. It's just like, okay, like, you can believe whatever you want and you can do whatever you want, and like, it's a self-interest thing. I want to be able to do whatever I want, and thus it is only appropriate and correct for me to understand that if I want to be able to do the things that I want to do, I need to let other people do the things that they want to do. Because once it's okay to get in people's business, then it's okay to get in people's business, and then people get in my business, and then people can do things to me and tell me that I'm not allowed to live my life the way I want, and then, I'm compelled to, like, be shoved into psychiatric care because I'm, like, not like other people, and, like, other people have a problem with it. Like, I don't want that to happen to me, so why would I want that to happen to other people? Or for other people to feel trapped in their lives and restricted and told that they can't do weird and bizarre things. Because that's messed up. And that's my conclusion to today's long, unhinged rant with no real point to it other than, like, man, you should really leave people alone. It's like, yeah, you should just leave people alone. And that's it. That's all I have to say.